As Bob Murphy used to say, it's a beautiful day for a ball game with a few puffy cumulus clouds dotting the sky. We're here at Citi Field with the voice of the Mets, Howie Rose. Howie, tell our audience how you first got started with the Mets organization. Was that Mets Extra?
Yeah, that was back in 1987. So that was my first year having anything to do with Mets broadcasting. And you'll note that was the season immediately after the last time they won the World Series. I'm reminded of that from time to time. But yeah, 87 was Mets Extra.
Who would you say was your role model for this job?
For this job? You mean in terms of the play-by-play, not Mets Extra, right?
Right.
Well, I think, you'd be lying if you were to say that, and I say the generic you, aren't influenced by those that you grew up watching or listening to. So specifically for the Mets, obviously, Murph is the first guy who comes to mind. And I was blessed to work some games on radio with Bob Murphy and on television with Ralph Kiner. And those guys were in my, eyes and ears for 7 months most years, right? Lindsey Nelson, too, for the first 17 years of the Mets. So they had a profound influence on me. And what I feel blessed to sort of be able to continue is that familiarity that builds over time, where it can't be an ephemeral thing where you're with a team for 2 years, 3 years. But, for those guys, especially Murph and Ralph, you just heard their voices and you thought Mets. And I've had people tell me something very similar, which is very, very flattering. But I think more than anything is just a testament to longevity.
You are the de facto historian of Mets baseball. Can you give us your impressions of this team composed to other teams you've watched?
Well, the problem with doing that nowadays is that everything's measured against what kind of success or lack thereof you have, certainly in a postseason, which now allows 6 teams in each league to participate. That's a big change from when I was growing up and you had to finish first in order to play in October. And for those who don't remember, when there were no wild cards, I can think of some seasons when the Mets contended but fell a little bit short, 1970, 1985, 1987. Those seasons were excruciating because every game was life and death. From opening day on, you knew that they were a contender and you didn't have the cushion of a wild card. You had to win the division. And I miss that. I know that we're in a different age now where we give participation trophies and everybody has to have the right to qualify or at the very least contend. But I really miss when you had to win the division to keep playing.
Can you take us through how you prepare for a game?
I try to keep it pretty rote, where I get to the ballpark about 3 o'clock, which is 4 hours prior to a 7 o'clock game. And as soon as I've got the lineups, I start putting them in my scorebook, because then I need to make notes for each player, which is just more, a safety net for me, which goes back to when I started. And I was always afraid I'd have nothing to say between pitches. So I wanted to have a little note about each player. And that's just time consuming. So usually I spend close to an hour doing that. And generally, certainly for home games, the manager, Carlos Mendoza, will meet the media at 4. I go down there and afterwards try to spend a little time, maybe even a little beforehand, speaking to a few players if there's anything I want to touch on that day or night. And then when I get back up, it's time to spend that hour between, close to 5 anyway, and 6 o'clock, getting everything set that I need to have whatever information I want at arm's length. And then that last hour I want for myself. 6 to 7, I'm having dinner, I'm in the media room. I don't really want intrusions or visitors. I just want to have that 1 hour to get ready for the game. And really, that's the routine.
How did Put It in the Books come about?
Well, it was pretty organic, really. It goes back to when I was a kid. And if I were playing ball in a schoolyard, and on those rare occasions when I was on a team that actually won, or even sitting in the upper deck at Shea with my friends, if my team won or if the Mets won, we might use a variation of, well, this one's in the books or something like that. But the real impetus for it was from the great Hall of Fame broadcaster of the Cincinnati Reds, Marty Brennaman, who would punctuate every Cincinnati Reds victory by saying, "And this one belongs to the Reds." And when I heard that the first time, I thought, man, that is perfect. It's succinct. It's not self-aggrandizing. He's letting the audience know the Reds won, and then it's on to whatever else he has to say. So I wanted to try to find something that might work like that. And I tried out a few different inflections, and nothing clicked really for me until one day or night, I forget the specifics, but the Mets won a game dramatically. I believe the opposing team was rallying in the ninth inning, close play at first base, third out, and I just hit it the way I say it now, put it in the books. And I thought, ooh, might have something there. I like that one, and stayed with him.
There's some irony in the fact that the call you're most famous for was for hockey, not baseball. Going back over the decades of Mets history, what is the call that you would have liked to have been the one to make?
Well, I certainly would love to have been in the booth on October 16th, 1969, and see if my heart would have survived what looked like a pretty long shot off the bat from Davy Johnson, ironically. But, to have been the home team announcer making that call, that would have been stupendous. I don't know how I would have handled the ball going through Buckner's legs. And frankly, this is what I'm hanging on for. I don't know how much longer I'm going to do it, but, I'd still like to have that opportunity to call a World Series winner. That's what motivates me to come back year after year whenever it's up to me.
Howie Rose, the voice of the Mets, thank you for your time.
You got it. Thanks, Anita.
Keith Raad joined the Mets radio team in 2023. Keith, you spent 10 years covering minor league baseball, including 5 years with the Brooklyn Cyclones. What was it like when you were told you'd be joining Howie Rose in the radio booth?
Well, Anita, I remember exactly where I was, down in Coney Island, outside Maimonides Park, home of the Brooklyn Cyclones, when Chris Olivero, Odyssey president of New York, gave me the call and said, you're going to the show. I still remember that moment where I was looking, how I was feeling. It was surreal because it's the culmination and the validation of everything that you're working on as a young broadcaster. No one's listening to you except your mother, down in the minor leagues. So finally you send some tape out, do some interviews, and get your shot. And I couldn't be happier.
You grew up in Valley Stream. They even gave you the key to the village in 2024. How did you end up a Yankee fan?
Yeah, well, a lot of baseball is, whatever your dad grew up doing. And my dad loved Mickey Mantle. And so we grew up, loving the Yankees. And it was not hard to be a Yankee fan growing up in the 90s and early 2000s because they did a heck of a lot of winning. But my first game ever was at Shea Stadium. We went to a lot of Met games. We never had any hatred for the Mets. We just love baseball. We just happen to watch the Yankees a little bit more. But as I worked in minor league baseball, I worked with people with the Texas Rangers and Cincinnati Reds and independent ball. So you have to love and develop relationships with some of those teams that you end up working with. And I ended up working with the Brooklyn Cyclones for 5 years and made some of the deepest familial relationships I'd ever had, much deeper than I ever had growing up as a kid, just watching the Yankees on TV.
You know a lot about the history of sports radio in New York. Who did you pay attention to growing up?
It is interesting to think about all the great voices, especially on TV and radio, as far as sports are concerned. I mean, I'm just going to name every single person: Sam Rosen, Howie Rose, Gary Cohen. On the Yankee side, Michael Kay and John Sterling. Susan Waldman is a huge idol for me. Just those voices that once I started getting into college, learning how to do this or learning what to do, and I would go, okay, I don't know what to do next. Maybe I'll try to do what those people did, which is how they're doing their job now and how they're becoming legendary icons of the broadcasting world. So if I'm doing a pregame interview, I'm probably doing a little Susan Waldman in there. If I'm making a big call, I'm doing a little Gary Cohen, a little Howie Rose. There's so many things that I was able to pick and pluck from people along the line that I absolutely use to this day.
What's your favorite part of this gig?
I think my favorite part is that feeling every single day around 3 or so about just getting to the ballpark that day. This is amazing, but it's 162 games. You're in every city every 3 days. It can be a lot, but every day there's a little moment that you go, man, I can't wait for this game to start. And I don't know when that shows up. It's usually around 3 or 4 o'clock, but that's that feeling of we have no idea what's going to happen tonight, and I cannot wait.
How do you prep for a game?
So my day begins around 3 o'clock, so about 4 hours before game time. Usually you grab the starting lineups. Starting pitcher for the day is huge, and you get your scorebook out over in the radio booth and get to work on prep, stats, stories, things that have come up over this player's career that you want to make sure that you get across to the audience, and then go downstairs to the clubhouse. open doors, talking to players, asking questions. I ended up having a one-on-one with Carlos Mendoza, the Mets manager, get to ask him some questions and pick his brain. And all of it is really, I talk about it, it's an open book test every single night. I'm absorbing things like a sponge from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock, and then at 7, it's open your mouth and tell everybody what you just found out for the last 4 hours. So that's usually a day in the life right there.
What's been your favorite thing to call so far?
It's funny that you say that because last year, the big playoff run, Howie Rose got crushed so many big calls, and I haven't had that big call yet. But this year, I was lucky enough it just came onto my inning that I got Pete Alonso's home run number 253, which set the Mets record, which was just a great moment to be able to call it energetically, and then paint the picture afterwards, which is something that Howie Rose taught me to do really, really well, is to talk about what people on radio who are driving around listening, they can't see it, so paint that picture for them, what the dugout is like, what the celebration is like, what the fans are like. So that was a moment that once it ended, I went, wow, that was something. And that was one of my biggest that I've had.
Mets radio announcer Keith Raad, thank you for your time.
Always good to see you, Anita.
Gary Cohen has been part of the Mets broadcasting team since 1989, first partnering with Bob Murphy in the radio booth and then moving over to the TV side for the 2006 season. Gary, you were a Mets fan growing up, and before you came here, you were the voice of the Pawtucket Red Sox. Take us back to May 4th, 1988, Mets versus Astros, when you walked in the doors at Chase Stadium that night to fill in for Gary Thorne. What was that like?
It was surreal. It was everything that I had ever hoped, and I felt as though I was on trial because it was clear that this was an audition, and I was as nervous as a person could possibly be. I give a lot of credit to Bob Murphy. He did a great job of calming my nerves. What I do remember is that Sid Fernandez pitched and Howard Johnson hit a home run, and the Mets beat the Astros 8-0. And then I went back to Pawtucket and thought about it a lot and hoped. And fortunately, that winter, I wound up here full time.
What are the differences between calling a game on TV and calling a game on the radio, other than the fact that on radio there are no pictures?
Well, you have to dress better and you have to play with others. I'm still a radio person doing TV, even 20 years into this. I think in radio and then have to translate it to TV, which basically means that 90% of what goes through my brain stays there and the other 10% comes out. And the hardest part is figuring out which 10% to let fly.
I know how you used to prep for radio since I was there for part of it. How do you prep for calling the game on TV?
It's the same. I mean, I think that preparation in baseball, because there's so little action and so much downtime, is really a lifelong pursuit. Things come up in the broadcast that I've prepared for that day, but also might relate to a conversation I had 2 months ago or something I read 50 years ago. I've been preparing my whole life for every game, but the game changes every day, so you have to keep up with it. So I always say that the baseball season is diving into the deep end of a pool in late February and coming up for air in October, and that's really what it is.
A three-man booth is a lot of people. How do you avoid stepping on each other, and what makes it click?
I think the best thing about our booth is that when we started, none of us knew what we were doing. So we were very reliant on each other. And I think the other piece is that despite having someone who deserves to be in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, in Keith Hernandez, and one of the best pitchers in Mets history in Ron Darling, it's an egoless booth. Nobody needs to be the star. Nobody needs to be carrying the ball. Nobody needs to be on camera. We all defer to each other because we have very different takes and very different points of view about the game. I mean, I come to it as a fan. Keith comes to it as a hitter and fielder. Ronnie comes to it as a pitcher. And we all have very different sensibilities. And I think we all respect each other enough to let everybody else shine. And I think that ends up being the bottom line.
Where did "It's Outta Here" come from?
Well, when I was in the minor leagues, I toyed around with all sorts of different hokey home run calls, thinking I had to come up with a signature call, and they were all terrible. So when I got to the major leagues, I thought, I'm not doing any of that. I'm just going to, describe what I see and let the chips fall where they may. And it's out of here is not exactly a unique expression. Plenty of other people have used it and still use it. I think it's the inflection that probably attracts people and makes people happy. And I try not to use it all the time, but it seems to work.
I asked this of Howie Rose, and now I'll ask you. Going back over the decades of Mets history, what is the one call that you would have liked to have been the one to make?
Oh, that's a great question. Obviously, the Buckner play, the ultimate out in the 69 and 86 World Series, those are easy. I would have loved to have called Tom Seaver's near perfect game, because that was really a seminal moment in Mets history. It was the day that you knew that the Mets were capable of competing, whereas for the first 7 years of their history, there was no chance for them to compete. So that's probably the one.
The current Mets broadcasting team of Gary Cohen, Keith Hernandez, and Ron Darling on TV, and Howie Rose and Keith Raad on the radio, is probably the most popular since the days of the original trio Lindsey Nelson, Bob Murphy, and Ralph Kiner. And now you know why so many people say this is the best team in baseball. I'm Anita Bonita for Channel NYC.